Welcome back to Be the Change podcast. We have a very special guest with us today, which I've, over the past, I guess, 6 months, gotten to know a little bit,
Mhm.
all about his journey. And he's on quite the journey and he's changed mindsets, writer, advocate, so many different things to describe you, Jeremy. I mean, there's so many different, words that I can use, and you have a fantastic bio that we're going to put up with this so folks can read all about you and your journey and how it's taken you, I guess, in some fantastic places, travels, most recently of, podcasting. A lot of podcasting. So you're the guru of podcasts, I suggest, in Newfoundland and Labrador at this point. You probably would have done more than most other people,
Mhm.
which is amazing. So I'm going to let folks listen to you a little bit about your journey and tell us a little bit about how you got into, I guess, this line of work, this line of business, shall we say.
Sure. Well, it's great to be on your show. I really appreciate you having me. So my journey started when I was pretty young. I was about 12 years old. So that's grade seven, around grade seven. And going into grade seven, I was kind of, I can't say I love school, but I did fairly good at it. And then things kind of changed in grade seven. And this was like mid 90s or whenever that was. We didn't have the internet. We didn't know what anxiety was. We barely knew what stress was, especially growing up in small areas. And long story short, I started to do these very strange things, and I didn't know why. So at 12 years old, it became very concerning. Um, I can remember I can remember playing ball hockey with my friends, coming home out on the street. This is like the first thing I remember, and legit, I think it was the first thing I've done related to OCD, as far as I can remember. And I tried to get to sleep that night, and my dresser drawer was sticking out about, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 inches, something like that. Never before would that ever bother me in a million years. But that night it did, and I didn't know why. So it was just, it wasn't anxiety at the time. It was more irritating than anything else. And I had no idea what was going on. So I stood up, I walked over, I pushed it in, and kind of like magic, that irritation went away. Didn't think anything of it. Went to school the next day, came home, and coincidentally, the same thing. One of my dresser drawers was sticking out a bit more than the rest that night. And just like the night before, it was irritating. Didn't know why. Got up, pushed it in, walked away, or went back to bed. I was fine. And as the days and the weeks went on in school, so this was grade seven, I started to do these, these weird things. I started walking over lines with my left foot first, and I feel awkward. I describe it as just feeling awkward back then. It wasn't anxiety. If I went over with my right foot first, things in my presence, I had to put on like a 30-degree angle or sometimes a 45-degree angle just to feel okay, to feel right. Didn't know why that was back then. Um, I can remember like the shavings from like the eraser on my pencil. I had to gather up and put in one corner of the desk and do the like my shoes had to be on a certain degree angle. And as the months went on, it became worse. And I did not know what was happening. I didn't know what OCD was. I can remember blinking to a particular number, a particular, rhythm inside of my mind. I remember repeating things. If I said, "How you doing?" I'd say, "How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? How you doing?" Like under my breath until my body felt right, until my mind felt right. And it just continued to progress more and more and more and more and more to the point where it became really, really difficult. And at that point, I was like, before that, I was like in the 90% average for school, went down to the low 40s, in danger of failing. I can remember my chemistry overall one year was like, if I remember correctly, it was like a 16, 1 6. Um, and it was becoming very difficult. And my parents were getting concerned, my family, my teachers. And then long story short, it was somebody who presented me with a magazine. I can't remember what the magazine was. I'd love to find that magazine now. And it was a girl's story of going through, like almost symptom for symptom, what I was going through. And I tell you, Stephanie, I did not think there was a human on this planet that did those kind of things other than me. And I know that's almost cliche, like we think we're alone, we're isolated. I didn't. This was mid '90s. I thought I didn't. I thought I was the only person who had to tap on things or count things or repeat things or like. Nowadays it's different. A lot of people know what OCD is. So she went on to describe she was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. First time I've ever heard of it in my entire life. And people ask me, was that relieving? I I think so, but it was scary at the same time that there was words to it. And then eventually I knew I had to reach out for help. And I encourage anybody who's going through anything similar, mentally or physically, reaching out for professional help is super important, as you know. And so I did that, and my father took me down to the doctor. That was a kind of a battle in and of itself for me to get to a place mentally where I wanted to go get help. And it was one of the best decisions I've made. And, was formally diagnosed with OCD and anxiety. And I didn't know what that was at the time. Actually, at the time of being diagnosed, I knew what it was. But before that, I had no idea before reading it in the magazine. And it was just, day by day, month by month, I started to look at it kind of differently. I could talk about this for hours. But I started to look at things differently and understand as much as I possibly could understand. There's a lot of mystery behind it, why it happened in my life. And I don't have those answers. I don't think I ever will have those answers, to be honest. But I reached out for help, different sources of help. And long story short, thank goodness that battle is behind me. We all have anxiety. We all have stress. I don't think there's any escaping that. And the work I've done since then with the presentations and anxiety and stress was never particularly for people with OCD. It was more so for people who were relatively in a good place in their lives, but still had some stress, still had some anxiety. And that's the kind of presentations I've done over the years, showing people how to, some techniques on how to calm the mind and live more in the present moment, so to speak. And that's my story in a nutshell. And it's so good that more and more people are talking about this subject, not only OCD, but any kind of illness we have or go through, because as you know, the more people who talk about it, the more secure people become to share their stories.
Absolutely. So that had to be pretty scary at a young age, all of a sudden, that something as well, someone might call it simple as a drawer sticking out by an extra inch or 2 inches, or something was out of place. That must have been pretty like, well, at a point it must have been like, what's going on? Like, what's
Mhm.
like I have to count, or I have to close a door so many times, or, different things that people go through, light switches or checking things and, all those things. So how as a person, because that's quite young, grade 7, like how as a young person, did you find, like coping mechanisms? Like how did you cope with that piece of it?
That's a really good question. I can remember, I'll give you an example of a nighttime, ritual.
Mm,
I'd go to bed. Well, before I go to bed, I'd wait until, and now this was in the height of what I was going through. So it was like the worst of the worst years. I'd wait until my mom and dad went to bed because they were always questioning what was going on. And because I didn't know what OCD was, I can remember so many times they'd ask, why are you tapping on things? Why are you counting things? Or whatever that was, whatever I was doing. And I'd awkwardly smile at them and I say, I don't know. And I kind of walk away because I didn't have an answer, because
hmm
this was before the magazine, but this before I knew what OCD was. But to give you an example of nighttime rituals, I can remember I'd used to wait until they went to bed, no matter what time that was. And we had, I think it was 27 channels on the TV. And I pick up the remote, and even that was a chore. To pick up the remote was a chore, because I'd pick it up and I get these graphic images in my mind of somebody who I love dying. And in order to get rid of that image, I'd have to basically do that again without thinking that. So I'd put it down, pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down. trying to fight off that imagery. And of course, as you know, when you're trying to fight off something in your mind, it's like if I looked at you and I said, "Don't think about a mouse." You're going to think about a mouse because it's in your mind, no matter how hard you try. So with OCD, it's so incredibly difficult. You're trying not to think about what you don't want to think about, but that effort is making you think about it more. So I finally, when I get the remote up in my hand, there's 27 channels. I have to go through all those channels without catching a glimpse of a negative number. There was no negative number, but in my mind, there was negative numbers. 3, 6, I can't remember the rest of them now. Maybe 9, I can't remember. But I'd have to close my eye as I was pressing the up key. And if I catch a glimpse of the number, I'd have to start over, put the remote down, pick it up, press power. The power button, I remember, had to fit perfectly inside of like this area of the thumb. And if it didn't, I wouldn't feel good. So I'd have to do that over. And long story short, I had to do that 4 times with the remote. And if I had a negative thought in my mind, which I always did, or if I happened to see a negative number or skip a number I shouldn't have skipped, I'd have to repeat it. So anyway, on the 4th time, once the numbers got up to like whatever it was, 17 or 18, I'd flick the up button really, really fast a bunch of times. And if you take your hand off, it would still continue to go up. And it's probably like that with still remotes today. And if I happen to land on 27 without thinking about a negative number, without catching a glimpse of a negative number, without thinking about a negative incident in my mind, and then I'd put my thumb on the power key and press down perfectly, and I was able to align the remote however it was on the couch. And if I did all that perfectly, then I could start the next ritual. That never did happen. I'd always mess it up. So it'd be up. I can remember the back pain, the pain in my back of just doing that and a hole in my back completely upright and not wanting to move, because if I moved, I'd have to repeat that. And I don't know if this makes sense, but even like sitting on a couch, it was hard because every movement I do, I'd have to repeat. Not every single one, but a lot of them.
Right.
So I'd try not to move as much as I could. And then anyway, when that part was over, I'd have to go into my bedroom, and there was like a grate on the floor where the heat came up.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd have to use my left foot first and go back and forth and back and forth. And the door handle, back and forth and back and forth. Then before that, I had to go to the bathroom, door handle, brush my teeth sometimes until it bled, the toilet seat. I could go on and on and on and on and on, to the point where this was just the nighttime, to the point where, and I didn't know what OCD was at that time. I didn't have a freaking clue what OCD was. And the isolation was almost unbearable. That was tough, because you think you're going absolutely crazy. And then long story short, I eventually got the help I needed. But yeah, to answer your question in a very roundabout way, it was very scary, especially later on, as those uncomfortable feelings turned into anxiety and panic attacks if I didn't do the compulsion. Because OCD, the best way I can explain OCD, is just my thoughts on it. I'm certainly by no means an expert. It's like trying to control your environment around you because you can't control the thoughts in your head. So it's like a compensation technique. You could put everything on a 30-degree angle or repeat things. And that's just what it meant to me. Everybody got their own version, but that's the way I can explain it inside of my head, if that makes sense.
Wow. That's a whole lot. Like, so we've seen movies around folks with, OCD of like stacking so that the cans are turned completely, in the same direction, and all those. So it's a lot of ritualistic things to go through in order to, I guess, to calm the mind and to feel in a space that I guess you could actually go to sleep. Like that must have took sometimes hours in order for you to be able to settle. Like that's probably understatement. Like if not longer. Like that's a whole lot for a young person. And so as you, I guess, progressed in age and got to know more about your OCD and then how it presented as anxieties and things, like how did you navigate that?
Once I started to understand that there was something called OCD, it was like a different ball game altogether. Then I think that was around the year, maybe we started to get dial-up internet. And so I spent a lot of time on the internet. I can remember Metacrawler. Remember that browser even before Google? That's what I was on, trying to search OCD and trying to figure out what anxiety was and the brain and the mind and all this stuff, and how many people had OCD. I can remember a list of people I found on a website of like public people, like celebrities who all mention in their story that they suffer with OCD, and I'm like, I would have never known.
Mhm.
And then you start kind of realizing that this is talked about, not necessarily talked about in movies, but there's, like you had just mentioned, like there's
Yeah.
movies where people do these rituals without ever saying they have OCD, and so you
Hmm.
become more attuned to that.
Yeah.
And then you kind of look at their actions and why they're doing what they're doing, and you kind of saying in your mind, hey, I can kind of understand that. But once I started to dive deeper into the brain and the mind, and once again, I'm no expert on this, it started to make a little more sense of why I was doing what I was doing. And people ask me, well, where did it come from? And I don't know. I don't think I'll have an answer for that. I don't think I ever will, because, it's been a long time since, and I don't have one yet. But yeah, I started to look at life differently, and you create a more compassion when you look at people, because you realize they probably got a story that you have no idea about, because I certainly had one, and it took me a very long time to talk about it. And it was the last thing I've ever wanted to talk about. I can remember doing present. It's funny, a lot of people uh, think that I started with the presentations on anxiety first, and it was the complete opposite. It was on business first.
Right.
But I can remember sharing. It was about, it was like a 2 hour presentation, and the last, like, literally it was a 2 hour presentation on business mindset. This was years ago. It was the last like 30 seconds. And I said, a lot of what I taught in this presentation, I use to help me get through a very bad experience with anxiety. And I'm telling you, that's all I said. And the next day, all the emails that came in, there was like 300 people at that presentation. And the next day, nobody cared about the business stuff. It was all, Jeremy, what did you have? My daughter has this, my son has this. Can you share? And then it finally hit me like a ton of bricks. And I'm like, Jeremy, you have a story to share, and people want to hear it. And you would have been in a place back then when you were going through what you were going through, where you would have wanted other people to share their story. And I'm telling you, it's at that point, it was almost like it was selfish not to share it. And I kind of tiptoed. I tiptoed in that area, because I can remember the first night I shared my experience. And I mean, it wasn't like 2 hours. It was probably like 10 minutes. And it was freaking tough. It was tough. And
Hmm.
then you looking at an audience, 400 people, and you get into like the really, really emotional stuff. And just, I can remember moments where I couldn't talk anymore on stage, because I couldn't hold it in. But eventually, when I started to share that story more and more and more and more and more and more, um, I I was able to do it without kind of just putting my head down and be like, okay, I got to stop. And but it was one of the best decisions I've come to ever make, because I noticed the message started to relate with people and resonate with people, and many people have reached out and said, your story has helped. So I was very blessed that I did get that courage. I don't know where, but to eventually find that courage to share my story.
Absolutely. And it's a vulnerable thing when you're on stage sharing something. It's not something belong to a friend. It's not something belong to a family member, but it's your story, owning it, sharing the vulnerabilities and all the feels that go with that. So the first time you ever share something so personal, it's just like, ooh, like how is this going to be, received from the audience, and what are they going to think? And like you go through all the things when you're public speaking, and it's daunting, no doubt, the first
Yeah.
time you share something like that. But the impact, right? The impact
Mhm.
that can have on helping one person or thousands of people with what they're going through, their struggles, because there's so many people going through anxieties and different pieces of OCD, because it presents, of course, differently than folks of what that looks like. So it's brave.
Yeah. Um, I can remember like yesterday. I was writing my first book called The Power of the Mind: How I Beat OCD, and it was in the middle of the book, and I was sharing my story like in presentations, and not a lot of people. I told this story publicly a few times, but not very often. And that morning, I woke up and I was supposed to do a presentation, like around 300 people, and it was on my story live in person. And I woke up and I said, "This is going to be the last time I ever share my story," because until the fear,
Mm,
I just wondered, and this was like, I don't know, 20 years ago. I can't remember, 15 years ago. And it just, once I was thinking all these very dark thoughts in my mind. Once I came out with this story in the book, I mean, that was, I said, Jeremy, that's it. There's no turning back. Everybody's going to know. There's thousands of people, or whoever's going to read the book, they're going to know some very deep, dark things. And so I woke up and I said, that's it. I said, the publisher can sue me. I don't know how that stuff works, but I'm not doing the book anymore. And but anyway, I made a decision that day that I said to myself, I'm no longer doing this book. Just the fear got the best of me. And I had a presentation that night. And I did the presentation. I shared my story. It was always an emotional part of the presentation. And I walked off the stage and I said in my mind, I said, you know what? Thank goodness I'm never sharing this story again. I'll just go back to the business mindset stuff. And I walked off the stage and these two women came up to greet me. And I always stick around the presentation. Whoever wants to come up, I'll stick around till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to chat with whoever wants to chat with me. And these two women came up, and I had the mindset of I'm never going to tell the story again. I'm done with OCD. I'm just going back to business mindset, the good old business mindset, what I've been doing for years. And the mother and daughter came up. The daughter was around my age, and they were both crying a lot. And the mother said, "This is my daughter. She was diagnosed with OCD. Uh, she can't go out on dates. She's failing school. She won't go to school. She won't socialize." And I'm thinking in my mind, this is the last time I'm ever going to share my OCD story again. Thank goodness. And she, the mother looked at me, and she had to talk for the daughter because the daughter was crying so much. And she looked at me and she said, "You have no idea how much hope you've just given us both." And I tell you, it was like I don't know how to explain it. It was one of those things that the timing was impeccable. Like I was done with the book. I'm not doing the book anymore. I'm never doing this presentation. I'm never talking about my story with OCD. Is just a fear got the best of me because it's such a dark period. And if I wouldn't have heard that message and that exact presentation with those two women who had the guts and the courage to get up in front of 300 people, walk up in front of the audience at the front of the stage to greet me, to tell me the most precise, perfect message that I needed to hear to build that courage deep inside of me to continue sharing my story. If they didn't have that courage, I would have never shared my story again. And it was because of them sh- showing that courage to me that kind of said to me, Jeremy, you're on the right track. Suck it up. There's going to be some bumps along the way, and you're going to go through some very stressful times in sharing this story. Um, but you're doing it for the greater good. And I have those two women to thank that I was led down that journey. And I think about it all the time. And I wish I knew them. I reached out on Facebook. I shared that story. And I'm like, if these people are you, reach out to me. I'd love to sit down and tell you how much of an impact you had on my life. But it goes to show how powerful it is to share a story. They shared theirs and it changed my life.
it is. It actually gave me goosebumps when you started saying it because we know the power of stories and the power of vulnerability. And I think that's why we share stories about the hard things we're going through because everyone has a
Yeah.
story. And I think it lets us build strength and just the human capacity that, hey, he can do it. So I can do it too.
Yeah. It's so true.
Right.
And the more we share our stories, I think we come to realize as long as we're sharing it in a vulnerable way
Mm-hmm.
for the right reasons, usually the people who we're sharing it with, they come back and say, I got a story for you too.
Mm-hmm.
And then people connect on a much deeper level. And I realize that the more I shared my story over the years, the people who are like closest in my life, who I never thought, had those kind of secrets or those kind of
Mm-hmm.
stories, they came back and they shared them with me, and I was just blown away. I was like, I would have never imagined in a million years. And but yeah, the more you share, the more you're vulnerable, the more people want to be vulnerable with the person sharing their vulnerability.
Yeah, 100%. So there's nothing more powerful than that, I think. I think sometimes when people go through things, they think there's no one else going through it, or how are
Mm,
people going to react, or how do I even share this? Right?
yeah.
Like getting that courage to be up in front of people, sharing your deepest, darkest secrets truly is just one of those things of, I don't know, is this brilliant, or is it going to be like a shame? Right? Is those moments
Yeah.
of fear. Like fear is what holds us back. And good on you, because fear holds a lot of people back from doing the things that they're passionate about, that they want to do in life.
And to that note, I'll also say all the fears before when I made the decision to never share my story again, all those fears inside of my mind that I thought would come true never did come true when I continued to share my story. It was no, it was a battle. There's no doubt. There was stress, and you get very vulnerable, you get very emotional, you tell things you don't want to tell, but all the really bad things in my mind. This is Jeremy. If you do this book, if you continue to share, this is going to happen. None of those things happened. It was just
Mm.
whatever you want to call it, the ego or my mind or whatever, just trying to get the best of me. But thank goodness, I found those two women in my life who shared their story and things. It's all history.
Would you call those synergies? What would you call those? I mean, it's the moments of we need that North Star to align with
Yeah.
where things are in our life.
I am a big believer in mindset and the power of thoughts. And I believe, that word believe, that is such a
Mm.
underestimated word. The word believe. I truly believe that the thoughts we think about on a regular basis, and I'm no expert on this, but I believe that the thoughts we think about on a regular basis shapes what we pay attention to. And I
Mm.
also believe, and who knows, I might be wrong about this, but I personally believe that everything happens for a reason. This is just me, how I tend to
Mm.
view things. And the way I kind of reconcile that is this. If we believe that everything happens for a reason, and we truly fundamentally have that belief, then we tend to focus on things that we could interpret as that reason. But if we believe, just bad things happen and there's for no rhyme or reason, I don't think our brain is going to force our eyes to see the reason. But if we believe there is a reason behind it, I believe the brain, something called the reticular activating system, is going to force our eyes to pay attention to things we typically wouldn't see. Kind of like when you buy a new car, you start to see that car everywhere. And it's not that we start to see that car everywhere. We start to notice that car everywhere because we saw that car the week before, we bought our car. But we're paying attention to it more because it's relevant. So I believe when we truly believe that the hardship, the difficult moment, the struggle, whatever it is, whatever that thing is that we hate, vigorously hate, and we believe it's happening for a reason, we're going to be more subject to finding and noticing that reason. We're going to pay attention to that reason more. But if we believe it's not happening for a reason, we're more likely, just in my humble opinion, not to see the reasons for those difficult moments, if that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. Because after listening to you in I guess a little while ago, a few weeks ago. It's yeah, like we start to notice things like you and I got on. We both noticed our
Yeah.
setups and our speed. Like that's the things that
Yep.
you notice when it's the things that you're into and the things that are important to you. So it makes a whole lot of sense to me. We're going to end this episode here because we're going to come out with another episode as well. So if folks want to reach out to you, find out more about what you're doing, look you up, where's the best way to connect in with you?
Best way would be my website, jeremybennett.ca.
Fantastic. Thanks for being with us. I truly appreciate you connecting in.
Pleasure is all mine. I really appreciate the chat.
Absolutely.